something starting with T. And so as I thought about this morning's lesson, I thought about Vince and diagnosis with cancer. And if you talk to him, spectacular attitude, brother. And one of the things that you share with us, and I want you to know that you share with me, is that positive, here's the direction we're going to go. In the morning class, we're just finishing up a series on leadership. And we comment that leadership is simply influence, no more, no less. People can influence in wrong ways or in right ways, but you make an impact. And so, I hoped I got started with number 2. The fact is, and it's a fine place to start. I could go back and reload. What happens is I take from my slides 1 through 10, but if I miss a slide, and I thought it's not worth going back and doing that. But the reality is that I start out that suffering is universal. Universal. Everybody does. In fact, not only everybody does, everything does. All humans, all land animals, all insects, all marine life, everything does. Why? Well, we live in a fallen world. So let's get to the heart of it. When we think about, because the lesson is, why do bad things happen to good people? The reality is, believers are not immune to this world's situation. In the book of Psalms, chapter 34 and down in verse 19, the psalmist said, many are the afflictions of the righteous. Think of what it would be like if God said, you become a Christian, no problems, millions of dollars, and everything is fine. Everybody said, okay, I'm ready. They're not ready because God is God, but because what they get out of it. And he tells us, just because you become a believer doesn't mean Shazam, there's a pink bubble that goes around you. That God's got a plan for the future and what that eternal home will be like. But this earthly home takes believers that are warriors. And I just have a series thing, 8-10 individuals that, if you're familiar with the Bible, in the book of Acts, in chapter 7, Stephen is basically on trial for his life. It's just impromptu trial. They're about to kill him. And he goes back and he recites their history. And he doesn't say, now, by the way, in Genesis 1 it says, and in Exodus 14 it says, and so in this one slide, I'm just going to hit the highlights because most of you know this background. Because the point I'm making is, it doesn't matter how righteous individuals are, everybody has points they meet in suffering. And God can bring you through it, telling us, here's how you do it. That's where this lesson goes. In the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 30, in verses 22 through 24, one of the greatest kings in the Old Testament, Josiah, he rejected all the idolatry of former generations, starts out as a young man, as a believer, and goes great, and ends up as a young man in battle and dies of his wounds. Wait a minute, God, we need this guy. He's a good guy heading everybody in the right direction. God said, yep, but that's as far as it goes. You go, why? The reality is he went into battle, and not everybody lives through every battle. But he was a great, great king. And then a great young evangelist in 1 Timothy 5 and down in verse 23. Paul converted this guy. And as a young man, his reputation for being good was not only known in the hometown of Lystra, but in Iconium, 20 miles away. Think about 15-year-old people that are so on track. He said, oh man, what a cool young person that is. Paul said a couple years later, I want this young man to go with me on the second missionary journey. So because of that, Timothy never had another problem. No, becoming a Christian doesn't solve all world issues. Paul later in life said, referencing to Timothy, here, take a little wine for your stomach's sake and your frequent ailments. He's not saying, hey, just toss back a few on Friday night and hang loose. He said, you've got medical problems, and the way they drank it was diluted. He said that mild alcoholic impact will have some good because you've got a lot of issues. And they didn't do miracles just to make people feel good, but to make believers. So Josiah had problems. Timothy had problems. A great servant of God in Philippians 2:24 through 27, Epaphroditus. Paul tells the Philippians that your servant Epaphroditus came close to the point of death in his service to me on behalf of you. And so people face critical, life-threatening situations. It's not that you become a Christian and nothing can pass through your cosmic armor. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 7 through 9 talked about his thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan. He said, I know where it got it. Satan wanted me to have this. But I want to tell you, God overcame that. We'll come back to this in a little bit. But it wasn't just a challenging disease. He'd been beaten with 200 lashes, and finally executed. He said, I fought the good fight. Wow, what's that do for us? He said, well, I got this problem. Well, what's that? Well, he said, Paul, did you go through what the Apostle Paul did? Oh, not even. Then bolster up that courage, Paul. Strap on your armor. Get ready for battle. And Bartimaeus in Mark 10:46, sometimes there's a children's song about that. He was a blind guy, and he's down in Jericho. Well, wait a minute. How about if nobody's born blind, there's no birth defects? We're going to talk about that. Well, how does that stuff come to happen? Stephen was stoned to death at the end of his presentation in Acts 7:58 through 60. The Apostle James, the brother of John, who wrote the Gospel of John, and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Revelation. What's it like when your brother's executed? It's devastating. John, he said, well, I'm done being an apostle. I'm giving up here. Boy, there's nothing. If that bad stuff, what do they do? He didn't have that attitude. He just kept on keeping on. In Mark 15:24, Jesus Christ was crucified for all of us. Mark 9:49 through 50. Interesting passage. You might jot that one down. It said, and everyone will be salted with fire. In Old Testament times, when they offered a sacrifice, in fact, we're just going through on Wednesday nights and talking about the temple and temples of God. There was the tabernacle, the temple of Solomon, that was destroyed, rebuilt by Zerubbabel, and then eventually expanded and rebuilt by Herod, and then that was destroyed. When they offered sacrifices on the altar, we never talk about this, but almost all of them, some salt was offered with that. And you'll see that from Leviticus chapter 2 and verse 13. We don't comment and say, well, here's the main sacrifice. But the reality is, everybody gets sprinkled with fire, with reversals, with heartache, with difficulty. Everybody faces those things. And I thought about the number of people here where they lost loved ones or children or mate or cancer or heart attacks or strokes. That's part of life. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's financial. Everybody faces hard things. That's the value of this lesson. And so with suffering, here's the facts. Your suffering may bring a blessing to others. Yeah, but, well, good. I want somebody else to be a blessing. I don't want to go through that. He said, that being so, appreciate others will be stronger because of how you face your own difficulties. We could go through Job's life, but we're not going to do it in this lesson. As Job went through all the stuff that he goes through, the end of it, Job never understood the why of it. He understood the how. And Job ends up saying, and I'll make reference to that he said, I've clasped my hand over my mouth. Job, you've got all the answers to life. You're going to show not only your friends are an idiot, God's wrong. So let's ask you some simple questions. Like Ben, who led our singing, his background and his academic standing is in physics. I want to tell you, I know about physics. I know quantum physics. Well, yeah, what's that mean? It means bundles. Having said that, what do you know? Nothing, I'm out. That's all I know. And what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Well, so how great is your mathematical science? Well, it's pretty narrow. You know everything I know, right? And gravity. So does that apply? I don't know if it applied. I mean, Paul, you don't know really anything. That's right. That's what Job is saying. God was saying that I don't like how you're running the universe, particularly in my situation. God said, let's see how much you know. He said, looking over the facts, I don't really know very much at all. And Paul's thorn in the flesh, which was seen as a trial by the Galatians, so it's thought it was eye problems and maybe diseased. And I always think about, you ever see a dog, I don't know what it is really, it's called a cold and it's green, I mean, just ugly. So how about, hi, there's some goo flowing down, amen. I'll listen, but I can't look at the individual. And he said there was a thorn in the flesh, and Paul prayed 3 times that it might depart from him. But it didn't happen. And God said, for power is perfected in weakness. When somebody said, yeah, I had the sniffles, I can't come today. Paul said, I've been beaten 200 times and I can't hardly see, but I'm here. I had a brother in Christ a long time ago. He was in Sumner. Bob Nolan, some might remember the name. And he had a number of challenges, but he ended up with lung cancer. And he had lung cancer because he had been smoking for years and years. Back in the 60s, we wondered if it had any relevance. And then later on we find out, oh yeah, it's significant. And he was taking radiation treatment and body held a lot of fluid. And he was standing by the back door. Mike Walker happens to be by the back door at the moment, and I'll just use him. And I went up to this brother Bob, and I said, Bob, thank you for being here. You're just an encouragement. I said, but I can tell you don't feel good. So why are you here? He said, where else would I be? I could be not at home feeling good, or I can be here. I've decided to be here. Guess what? 50 years later, I still appreciate him for that. He set an example that encourages me. In James chapter 1, in verses 3 and 4, it talks about that when our attitude ought to be to rejoice in our varied, many faceted trials. We had a sister in Christ with us that had multiple health reversals and wheelchair bound, and she was one of the most loving people I know. People would come in, she didn't even know their names, and she just want to hug them. Hi, honey, how you doing today? Which is wonderful, wonderful attitude. And I asked her, because, she had diabetes, she had heart trouble, she had cancer. And I said, what do you think about this when James says to rejoice in your many-sided trials? She said, well, that's the human side of us. It takes us a little while to get around our mind around that and to see how it really does us good. The reality is, it changes you. If you demonstrate that right attitude, it strengthens you, gives you greater endurance. Man, I overcame the last thing. This thing, just one more thing. Your faithful example then strengthens others for decades, and you never even knew it. Here's the facts about suffering. And that is, your suffering doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Oh, why is God whacking me with this? The wicked have awful things happen to them, a lot of times because they make awful decisions. I talked to a lady counselor on alcoholism one time. I said, how do you define it? She said, well, actually it's hard to define, but if you keep falling down manhole covers and running your pickup into trees, you probably are one. That is, you make decisions that aren't very good, and then you suffer for them. And so Proverbs 4, and down in verse 16, it says, the wicked stumble over what they don't even know. Well, how did that happen? Well, guess what? Because you did this you shouldn't have, or didn't do that which you should have. Well, it's part of your process of making really poor decisions. But the reality is, and I'd like you to think about this, it may just be a fact of aging, or of timing, or an accident. For instance, in Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and down in verses 10 and 11, says, the race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong. I mean, just because I'm faster doesn't mean I won't stumble. Somebody will spike me on the road. I slip, I hit a hurdle or something. Just speed alone doesn't guarantee I'll cross the finish line first. And so I did a little research on that. We know that our cells reproduce. Some cells every day, some every few months, and so forth. And I'll just go to the bottom line without talking about the math of how you get there. In order to reproduce, our cells have a code that says, oh, this one's supposed to be a fingernail, that's an eyelash, this is a bicep muscle, this is a red blood cell. And so it has a code of what should be happening with this particular cell. Billions of decisions your body makes every day in doing that. It's not like one or two things. And because the way it has to make, I'll say, these decisions, the DNA, the code building mechanism, says there are 300 billion errors your body makes every day. But God built in it a replicating system. It checks it out and says, that one's wrong, okay, fix it. This morning, I had my lesson all done. I went back and said, man, you didn't have that word spelled wrong. Look, and I went back and I found just little errors. You'll find them, they're still in there. I just missed some of them. And what happens is, your body corrects almost all the errors, the DNA, as it's making these replications for new cells. It'll make errors and said, we're going to have that fixed. You're going to be just fine. Or it is so inconsequential, it doesn't matter. Cancer is one of those things. Cancer isn't a germ that jumps on you and bites you. It's you. It's your own DNA starts coding wrong. Now, different things can cause it. Chemistry, just an accident, happens all the time. But it's not like God picked you out and said, I'm trying to smite Robert today because the guy's a rat. That's part of life's structure. In the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, individuals, they see a blind man that was born that way. And they ask, who sinned that this man or his parents that is born blind? He's thinking, okay, I think what the problem is Diane. Your parents were goofed up, and so, wait a minute, God, I'm not doing that. Jesus says, neither, but that this man might have the works of God shown in him, manifest or displayed in him. God said, I'm going to allow that to happen because I want to make something better come of it. It's not that no good Mike Walker back there, I remember 1954. God's not trying to get even. He said, that's just part of life. That happens. It doesn't demand that you did something wrong. Well, what about suffering? There's things you can do when you're facing suffering. And I thought about this, and I mentioned it in the morning leadership class, in Proverbs 14:33. Wisdom lies in the heart of the one who has understanding. Get the facts. Read up on it. Talk to individuals. See what's their best understanding. In Proverbs 15 and down in verse 22, Jim Hester made a reference to counselors. There the writer of Proverbs says, in many counselors there's victory. Henry may say this, and Wilbur says that. So get the best, what's the best facts? All right, the facts seem to indicate A or B or C. And then think about this. This applies to somebody facing life-threatening things. The reality is, it ought to apply to all of us. We all say, yeah, mañana, some other time I happen to be busy. When Isaiah tells Hezekiah, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. Guess what I could rightly say to everybody in the audience? Why? Because unless the Lord comes again, nobody that I know lives to be 4,000 years old. We shall all die and not live. So when are you going to set your house in order? When are you going to get your physical situation as strong as it can be? Your mental situation, your financial situation, your family situation, your spiritual situation. Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. Once we come to terms with that, we say, whew, okay, what do you do? Well, in everything, in Luke 2:52, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and men. Look at the 4 general areas of your life. And you say, here's what I need to do. I thought about, and for men, a lot of times, they face death and they meant to get around to the simple thing in a digital, highly technical world. Do you have all your passwords written down someplace? If you bump off tomorrow, your family knows where to look. Do they know how your financial structure is? What bills to pay? What one? Because Glenda, a long time ago, I realized I'm doing all the bills, doing income tax, everything else. And I thought, well, Glenda needs to understand that. And so she took it over for 5 years so she could kind of grasp it. And she said, what about this or that? I thought, I never told her. I keep that stuff in my head. And no, I didn't write that down. But in my head, the answer is A, B, C, and D. And so you come to realize there's all kinds of things your family could, should, ought to know. Have you made out a will and safe deposit box? All these kind of things. Set your house in order, regardless of how old you are. Another favorite of mine, but it applies in Daniel 11:32b. Those that know their God will display strength and take action. Okay, I've got the right information as best as I can understand it. I've done the kind of things to get my own life and pointed in the right direction. And sometimes you get paralysis by analysis. I think I better ask 54 more people and waffle around back and forth. Make a decision. Out of these 5 different ways I can go, B seems to be the best one. Then get after it. What's the most reasonable thing to do right now? And then in 2 Kings 20:3-6, think about this. Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed and said, God, remember me. I think about it as a Hezekiah event. Isaiah came back to him and said, God's granted you 15 more years. Many of us know individuals that Pam Farrar was said, you got 6 weeks, she had 9 years. Karen Bartle, boy, here's this deadly form of cancer. Your sister God claimed her life. Guess what? Whatever it is, 12 years later, she's still chugging along and doing all right. And so many, you have faced things, overcome things. And that's my prayer for each one, and for Vince in particular. Every day, I think, God, you're in control. I want to tell you what I'm in control of. Virtually nothing. I try to get me on track, and that's about as good as I can do. God's in control of everything. And as we think about that, I appreciate Isaiah chapter 40 and in verse 31. And they will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They'll walk and not faint. Job went through all the emotions that you go through with grief. It was real. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, he lost all his wealth, all his children, not one at a time over 20 years, but all at the same time. Wife gave up on him, hey, just curse God and die. His friends say, you're a liar. You have to be doing things bad. Look how bad what you're going through, so you got to be a big sinner. Brothers abandoned him. And he just felt isolated, but he didn't give up. And that's us too. And that's what I wanted to share. Here's God's insight on why bad things happen. Sometimes it's Satan, sometimes it's just events. Whatever it is, it's maybe part of age. Why did they have that accident? There was an idiot coming through the intersection at the wrong time against the light. But we want to have an attitude, whatever God brings our way, we're going to be faithful, we're going to encourage others, and do the very best we can. Because we want to soar on wings like eagles. Let's be standing as we sing this invitation song. We've heard the joyful song. We've been called into Christ. If you're not a believer, we encourage you to be. If you'd like to study Bible, we'd love to talk about it. Let's be singing the song. You can let us know by coming forward, if you will. Okay.